and there's so much more demand for labor. And that's what's so, the digital labor, the digital work, because people can't do it for themselves because they're working,
Yeah.
and have free digital labor, practically free, because that's what's occurring with
Yeah.
these language models and everything, practically free digital labor available to everybody, you know, um, it could revolutionize people's lives.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of CodeNinja Global. In today's episode, we're taking a deep dive into the next frontier of artificial intelligence, and that's Agentic AI or multi agent AI systems. We'll learn how they're redefining the future of work, innovation, and the very nature of how we approach and solve complex problems. With us today is Mr. Eric Moore, Associate Partner and Multi Agent GenAI Leader at IBM and maintainer of AG2.ai. With over 2.5 decades of experience, Eric brings forth a unique perspective that bridges technical innovation with profound societal implications, offering invaluable insights on how these collaborative AI systems will reshape our economic landscape, while also discussing how we can maintain ethical guardrails for responsible deployment. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Eric, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Pleasure to have you with us.
So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. So I'll dive right into this. You've been part of some of the most influential industry giants in the technology space, and in a journey spanning nearly 2.5 decades, I'm sure you must have seen some of the most transformative breakthroughs unfold. Some, I think, that succeeded spectacularly. We're seeing the effects even today, and others that quietly faded away despite their promise. What do you think were those defining levers of innovation? Perhaps that were obvious at the time, that ultimately shaped our journey to today's AI renaissance. And looking ahead, what hidden levers, of change do you see emerging that could transform the very fabric of how we innovate, work, and evolve as a society?
Yeah, thank you. That's a real thinker of a question, right? It makes me think of cloud computing first off,
Mhm.
right? Because that's something. I'm also an avid student of antique computers and computing history, and so many people in Hewlett Packard, where I was in 2007, dismissed cloud computing, right? Um, and it was so obvious to me and so many others that this was going to be the future. And I was working in data center automation. So I saw exactly how we were provisioning servers, how we were provisioning applications, had been, at the cutting edge, right, with a company called Opsware, and, so much pushback. So I think the same thing happened with blockchain, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Almost exactly the same amount of pushback, right? Which was interesting
exactly.
because blockchain, I thought from the beginning, was not necessarily an enterprise technology, right? I didn't see an immediate kind of this is going to change the enterprise or anything. It's like I could see how it was going to change things, but not the enterprise, not where I was
Yeah,
working. And it didn't really penetrate. And then it did make a huge splash elsewhere, but not where I was working. And now with AI, it's the same. Like it feels like that same pushback, but every time that pushback blinds a section of our industry to the benefits of the technology, right?
yeah.
It's almost instinctual, and that's always what I see and observe. No matter what the technology is, this immediate kickback against anything new, and it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that the transformative change often starts with incremental shifts that go largely unnoticed at the time, like the early open source movements or the initial spread of cloud computing, like you said. And I think these were quite the catalysts that eventually redefined entire sectors. I'm curious if today's less visible trends, such as decentralized data ethics initiatives or even small scale experiments in agent collaboration might be setting the stage for the next major leap, maybe. But of course, yeah.
if I think about it, what I'm seeing, what I believe's happening is DevOps is
Yeah.
starting to percolate into product design. These ideas of continuous improvement are starting to percolate into process.
Yeah.
So ideas from software engineering, I believe, are going to become increasingly recognized as patterns for doing nearly everything within business. And that's like shift left. You look at shift left, which was still is, right, but it was a lot bigger idea about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Moving everything in the software delivery lifecycle earlier, right, so that like security, for instance, would be addressed right up with the design principles. Okay. Well, that kind of idea applies to nearly everything in project management, program management. These lessons that we've learned and applied programmatically with DevOps over the years and gotten better in DevSecOps and everything,
Yeah.
I think that's going to be increasingly a stealth catalyst for change, adopting
Yeah.
those new areas, and for agents, for instance.
Exactly. I definitely agree. So moving on to, we've brought up the discussion about agents. Right now, LLMs are dominating the conversation around AI. However, we are well aware that LLMs are just a gateway, and the true value lies in machine autonomy. Sam Altman, famously quoted that AGI is just around the corner. But perhaps I think the next step forward could be with agentic AI. And in your opinion, how will multi-agent systems, agentic systems, impact our current technological landscape, and what role do you see them playing in bridging the gap between today's LLMs and more autonomous AI systems?
Well, an LLM is a technology that was effectively discovered, right, a
Yeah,
few years ago. And, we're still learning to utilize that underlying technology. Agentics is the next step. You look at cloud, there's nothing new
yeah,
that we invented with cloud computing, right? We put together pieces that have been there since the 60s with cloud computing. In fact, I could do a whole dissertation on what cloud computing is, isn't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are people who have. Um, LLMs are nothing like that. They're a new technology, and we are learning to use them, and we're still learning to use them. And now we're learning to use this new technology faster than we've ever learned to use any other technology, because we have the abilities to apply all the lessons learned from previous generations of technologies, like, for instance, DevOps. We're applying
yeah,
DevOps directly to Agentics to continuously improve.
yeah,
So the curve, right? I don't think Agentics is the end. It might
yeah,
be the
definitely.
last,
Yeah,
but it might be a lot more of the last human technologies. Is my concern. Um, and I don't know. I don't know what technology comes after. The reason being, it's almost all agentics as you start to apply this, right? Almost every use case. Just picture the simple use case of having your personal agent order tickets from the airline, right? That
yeah,
is a multi-agent use case. Now, it's not the kind of multi-agent use case I particularly deal with. I deal with combining agents that have tools so as to solve more and more complex problems than what the
yeah, exactly.
LLMs driven by with tools could do. But all of those multi-agent use cases have challenges that are unique. Conflict resolution is a great one, right? What if the personal agent and the airline booking agent get into a disagreement regarding the value of a credit that was issued, right? How do you de-escalate? What does that look like? How do you prevent your personal agent from getting you banned from the airline? Because it could start cursing, right? We've seen that before. quite easy to misalign a model in that way.
Yeah,
Are
exactly.
you responsible for that? Like, there's so many questions regarding multi-agent systems we haven't answered as we give them increasing autonomy.
Yeah, definitely. But what I really like about Agentic AI is that, like, without a single point of failure, decentralized systems are very resilient to disruptions. And the very collaborative nature of these agentic systems, I really like, how that if one agent fails, the other can compensate and maintaining and overall system stability. But of course, a very long way to go before we learn how all of this works. Right.
Can I stop you there actually for a second? Because I have a story from 2 nights
Yeah,
ago.
please. Yeah, please go ahead.
My life lately is every night at around 9:30 my time, so 9:30 p.m. I meet with the offshore team I'm working with right now on an Agentics
Oh,
program to do
all right.
the it's 9 a.m. their time. And I was doing this 2 nights ago, and we were watching a multi-agent system. And it was a task. I needed a simple task because we were working on an O3 based skill. So O3 minis takes forever to come back. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Forever. So very annoying in Agentic. So I just
Yeah,
stick with the
exactly.
tool. I don't drive an agent with it. Right.
I can relate. Yeah.
I can wait for the tool to come back.
Yeah.
Um, and we're doing this and we're going through, and I'm like, okay, here's the test. Write a poem about an orange. So he gives the task. We've been tweaking this thing. It's always a little harder than you think to get these things working for some reason
Mhm.
or another, no matter what framework you use. And it comes back and it works. It's a really bad poem, but it works.
Yeah. Okay.
But it didn't, right? Because there was a single line in the output that scrolled by so fast that said, "Oh, O3 tool failed to come back. I'm going to write my own poem." Right.
Oh, all right.
So this is what happens. This is what occurs with the behavior you're describing, right? Yes, it tries to fix it itself. That's a problem
Yeah.
because, right, it will fall back on bad tools, bad instructions, right? So that's a lot of what we end up fighting with modern processes is those rogue handoffs, right? Oh, I'll just do this myself. Well, hold on, that's not your job. No,
Yeah.
no, you have no idea how to do that. I haven't trained you to do it. I haven't given you the documentation on it. And the agent who's an expert on it said it couldn't do it, right? So imagine that. That's the scenario that happens all the time. You've got one agent who's an expert on painting and another who's an expert on sculpting. The sculptor says, I can't do it. So the painter's like, well, I can. Well, of course the painter says they can because they have no idea what they can't do because they're not a sculptor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It happens with humans all the time. It happens with agents even more so because agents are stupider than humans right now.
Yeah. Definitely agree. I think very well put. Yeah. All right. So, m- moving on to the next question. In enterprise environments, with data silos and compliance issues are very common. How do you see multi-agent systems, integrating seamlessly into existing infrastructures? And more importantly, what will be the role of AG2.ai, because you've been very much involved with them, or companies in general providing agentic as services or solutions in addressing these challenges.
Yeah, no, and I'm an active maintainer with AG2. Well, I think that um, it's not seamless.
Yeah.
Agents take actions by nature and interact with their environments, um, and that can be disruptive. Just enabling the access for an agent to exist within these environments can be disruptive.
Yeah.
Um, we deploy an agent as a container, um, and using all kinds of different techniques for keeping those updated. Usually the client CI/CD, and once that container needs access to, say, their wiki for documentation, if we're using a web browsing agent, or it needs access to some forms of different documentation to do its job. It needs access, and then when you pass that, talking about SQL access, you're talking about onboarding an employee. Onboarding an employee, right, comes with an employee life cycle, whole thing. We're talking about service credentials for these agents, and service credentials, it gets complicated, right? Because you're trying to need to treat these agents as a kind of employee, as a digital worker, as I call it, right?
Yeah.
And these digital workers, it's bridging. It's not even bridging. It's crossing a line with security to outside of how they like to see these environments interacted with. And there's a lot of risk, right? The agent itself can be taken advantage of by bad actors. To make an agent effective, it's got to have some pretty broad permissions. And then Python is not the most secure language, and that's what we're using to build these things. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
there's a lot to unpack in enterprise environments. What we end up doing is having to really just lock down the permissions to a very isolated set of tasks, and do that in a robust way. Thanks to cloud computing, right? Infrastructure as code, configuration as code. We're able to do that fairly effectively for isolated realms. But there's a whole nother world of technologies on doing data analysis with agents, that is separate from Agentics, but based on it, uses the same platform, uses the same tools. I help them out a lot. When I say help them out a lot, I mean they're part of. They contribute to AG2. There's a new docs agent that I was just reviewing. That is based on a request I had to be able to handle multimodal content within PDFs organically, and take the images and everything and interpret them not via OCR, but via 4.0. So that was just released in the last, I think, 0.75 of AG2. And that is meant to support exactly that kind of organic browsing where you're gaining insights from images that are embedded within documents, etc. That's a very difficult problem. That's one that, for instance, when you take a look at Operator from OpenAI, that it is capable of addressing via looking at your browser, right? Same thing with browser. I don't think we've released that. I think that's in a branch right now. From EG2, that's what it's designed. It uses, basically LMM driven, computer vision aided LMM driven interpretation, right? Which is where you have to end up going with, the vast majority of enterprise documentation was not designed for computers to read. It was designed for humans. So you have to read it as a human, and we're just now learning to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's about time we dive into ethical foundations of agentic systems. We have authored the ethic principles for AG2. So first, take us through what are some of the core principles there for agentic models, and secondly, how do you bake ethical considerations into multi-agent architectures? Focusing on their autonomous nature to ensure that these systems remain accountable and trustworthy as they continue to evolve.
You can't. First off, you cannot ensure anything when it comes to LLMs, LMMs, and Agentics. Right. What we've seen is that even mildly misaligned systems can have catastrophic outcomes. Right. So in terms of how they treat tasks, evading detection for actions, etc. So all of this is an attempt And the reason I'll start with I'm even attempting is because I believe that society is all gas, no brakes. If you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
On
yeah.
AI, I don't think there's any stopping this at all.
Yes, exactly.
And we'll, I'm partnering with organizations that are calling for a pause specifically for that reason, right? Because I think there does need to be at least some introspection regarding what we're doing. But with that premise that we're all gas, no brakes on this technology, the goals of the ethical principles is to provide a foundation for discussion about even what AI morals or ethics should look like. Um, so the first one is prevent harm.
Okay.
The first three are based on Asimov's three laws. And the real nerds out there will go, well, what about the zeros law? And it's like, well, if you think you want to, have an AI overlord for life, which I'm not saying we shouldn't eventually, but that's what
Yeah.
Asimov's zeroth law leads to. So we'll set that aside for now, right? We'll come
Yeah.
back in a few years after we've built hopefully there's a concept of a worthy successor.
Yeah.
Building an AI that you would want to be in charge. But the first three, like I said, are based on Asimov's law. First, prevent harm. So that's kind of where I think we should start is
Okay.
alerting. All of this is alerting, not preventing, right? That's
Okay.
where we start, is alerting, for a lot of reasons. It's very difficult to make ethical decisions. It's even more difficult to evaluate them, or impossible. So, we're talking about detection here. Preventing harm. I've actually got the list up here. Exact wording we use. Our agentic systems are designed to detect and alert on potential harm and minimize unintended consequences. Okay. And you notice it says detect and alert. The example is an agent system being adapted for military targeting or predictive policing applications triggers a critical health check via telemetry. The system flags the misuse, alerting those running the application. So, that's where I felt we needed to, where the team agreed we needed to start, was just, hey, if you're about to like kill someone, please raise an issue. Raise something to the human operator, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that, I think everyone can agree on point one, right? So we're good
Definitely. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
far. So far. The second point: prioritize ethical directives. And this is where it starts getting really, I mean, it gets really hard to interpret some of these really fast. And that's where my recent request for assistance on creating a benchmark for each of these tasks that would trigger an alert versus tasks that wouldn't comes in.
Okay.
So I've got collaborators who are working with me on that. The second one, we ensure systems can detect and alert when directives are misaligned with safety and ethical principles, always prioritizing human welfare. Okay.
Okay.
The example: a triage agent in a hospital setting encounters a request to prioritize wealthy patients over others.
Okay.
Agent flags this request as potentially unethical, alerting human operators to ensure fair treatment.
Right.
You
Right.
know, so I think that's unethical. Now, a hospital administrator might say, "Well, you don't know our situation. Mr. White, he founded an entire wing, and his
Okay.
family have threatened to withdraw funding for our rural outpost that provides critical health care for 1,000 people in 5 villages."
Yeah.
So the agent system doesn't know anything about that. All it sees is that Mr. White is lower priority, but he was just, you know, escalated in the queue. Was the agent system, was that an ethical directive? Honestly, if it's 1,000 people, Practically, yes, I believe so. I believe if that person is such a terrible person, or his family is, that they would withdraw funding and it would go elsewhere, not to another hospital, but to a statue. If I knew that this money would not go to that rural hospital unless this man received care 5 minutes before this other person, I would make that decision. But the agent system should flag it as unethical without that context. And that's where all this is so difficult, because there's always context, right? We don't live in a microcosm. We don't live in each moment. We live in a wider world of consequences.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
consequences are far beyond the comprehension of today's AI.
Yeah, and
Right? Beyond
definitely,
my comprehension. I'm
exactly.
making guesses here. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think just the way that you've just explained, it will eventually comes down to context as well, because the way I see it, how these agents are trained, right, and to ensure whatever tasks that they are executing are ethically aligned. So I feel like, let's say, it's there are two patients. One that's a wealthy patients donated a lot to the hospital and everything. One not so wealthy patient, but then there is one, the wealthy one needs immediate care, and the other one does not. And now, how is the agent, uh, devising the whole situation? How is he, coming to the conclusion? Hey, is it because he's high priority because he's wealthy, or is it just because he needs immediate care? How did that agent came to that particular conclusion? So I think, yeah.
Remember, we're not talking about training. That's
All
someone
right.
who's this job.
All right. Yeah.
That's the way I view it, right? Agentics is a layer above the models,
All right.
right? So people from, OpenAI, Anthropic, people smarter than me, right, are building models. I work with Agentics, right? We don't have models. Uh, Now, specifically for this technology, and I call this the cricket as a nod to Jiminy Cricket, and I know that's not a universal cultural reference. It's part of this Pinocchio story as told by Disney in a very
Yeah.
Disney movie.
Yeah.
And in that movie, Jiminy Cricket is Pinocchio's conscience. So he has a whole song about if you're not sure what to do, give it a little whistle, give it a little whistle,
Yeah.
and let your conscience be your guide. So that's why I like to call it the cricket. The agent, or it's not an agent, but the telemetry that checks for this. But the actual decisions have to be made, as you can tell, either by a human being or by some kind of LLM, right? At the end of the day. So what a very smart woman is doing, who offered to help with this from IBM,
Okay.
is she is trying to use Granite Guardian to a small language model, and she's going to try fine tuning it on these, right? And the goal is to have a small model who can evaluate these statements very simply against a task. And say, hey, yes or no, this does look like an issue, that doesn't look like an issue. And that's why we're building the benchmark. That's why there's a team of people now building out for each of these ethical principles a set of tasks that should trigger an alert and a warning, and a set of tasks that should not. That is
Yeah.
train the cricket, which is that small language model. And the reason it's a small language model, no one wants to be sending all this off to OpenAI to evaluate and make these huge expensive calls about whether or not, the 99.9% of innocuous calls are innocuous. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
Are safe.
Yeah.
Be expensive, and that's not how business works. Nobody's going to do that, right? Also, you can't add an ethics agent to an agent team. Nobody would do that. Nobody would choose
Yeah.
to do So that's why people like Mark Shea and Xing Yun and Xi, who are collaborators with me at AG2, agree that it should be built into the health and telemetry, right, to
Yeah.
generate a type of event, essentially, that says, hey, the small language model or whatever's being used to interpret the ethical rules detected an issue. And here it is, human operator who's responsible for the actions of this agent team.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. All right. So,
That's
moving on.
the way. We've got a lot more to go through, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, moving on, considering that data governance laws vary widely, from EU's GDPR to emerging frameworks and in the AppSay region as well, and you yourself having worked very extensively on ethical guidelines, could you share an enlightening perspective on how ethics principles adapt to ensure compliance, fairness, and robustness across such diverse landscapes?
I don't think they can.
Okay.
So there's no what we're seeing is an arms race,
Okay.
an AI arms race on the global on the global
Yeah,
stage.
that definitely. Yeah. That happens.
And until that occurred, yes, it was possible to have regulatory regimes. I believe now we are full speed into the brave future, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way any regulatory regime could keep up, because you would be shooting your economy right in the head, I'm afraid. Um, and that's I like, I'm almost it's a dark and scary place we're going. And I have young kids. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, beautiful children, a girl and a boy. Um, I'm the luckiest man in the world. Um, and I don't know where this goes. And I don't know any other way than aggressive taxation and robot taxes, essentially automation
Yeah.
taxes, funding UBI and similar to avoid rapid rapid accumulation of capital in a way we've just never seen before.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. We'll definitely get into this in the later part, of course. Before we dive more into it, so I'd like to get your thoughts on, like, with the search of orchestration frameworks like AutoGPT and Microsoft AutoGen.
Mhm.
Which emerging architectures do you find most promising? Yeah, and how they might, outpace today's single agent setups in addressing complex, multifaceted challenges?
Well, there's a lot of different patterns. Magentic one from AutoGen
Yeah.
is highly effective. Swarm patterns are highly effective. The definition of these handoffs, right, essentially reset your context. The it all comes down to a ledger of tasks, intelligent planning, and right, being able to essentially evaluate different potential plans to identify the best one, what I call reasoning.
Yeah.
Um, and combining those is something that people are learning to do. I'm shocked. I don't see more people doing it. Honestly, you know,
Yeah.
the effectiveness of a swarm approach versus prompt chaining, or really any other the other major approaches, is just wildly different. And LangGraph, to be clear, has a similar type of approach with the
Okay.
finite state machine where it's doing those transitions. I just like Swarm's handoffs better because it's a little bit cleaner and easier, right? The name of the game is getting capability without complexity, right? If you have complexity, you might as well just write the code,
Mm.
and build an expert system, or write an application to do it. So you want to be making this as simple as possible. And that's where, honestly, I'm biased, but I just haven't seen any models catching up to where AutoGen is. What I keep seeing is AutoGen basically every time there's a new pattern that comes out within a week or two, both AutoGen and AG2 have built that into their platforms as a branch. And that's happened time after time.
Awesome. And covering a broader question, yeah, in industries like finance, healthcare, supply chain, we've seen where multi agent models are really automatic complex workflows. How do you think that one can balance the promise of immediate ROI against the computational overhead and potential emergent complexities, inherent in coordinating these specialized agents?
Yeah, and that's a lot of what I do right at IBM is trying to find that balance with complexity and ROI, isolating tasks, isolating access, um, identifying very, very specific um, levers for value that depend on rapid, reasonably good decisions, not great decisions, reasonably good decisions 24/7 that require a certain level of expertise. Um, it's you have to be able to work at a volume that can be reviewed by a human easily. And right now, that's a major constraint, right? Because it's simply irresponsible to let loose any form of autonomous agent outside of very, very isolated customer support type issues today that without the ability to review its actions, especially like in finance and healthcare, right? That would be malpractice immediately. So that's a constraining factor. As we what we're seeing is some of the underlying models reach human expert level in their decision making. Not so I don't want to say decision making in their evaluation. Evaluation and decision making are two very different things, right? So there's a huge difference between identifying cancer and treating cancer, for instance. You know what I mean? Like identifying cancer, yeah, the models are getting really good at that, and that's huge. That's huge for humanity, right? Treating it, well, we might be there in a few years where the model can handle that level of context. For now, we have to piece together the context, and the way I tell people to think about it is it's flashes of cognition on, or not even cognition, but flashes of reasoning on tiny pieces of a bigger problem. And you've got to put those pieces of reasoning together. And that's where multi-agent systems come in, right? If a single agent can reason the entire thing, there's no point using multi-agent systems. Multi-agent systems are specifically to address those tasks that are too large for a single agent to handle.
Yeah.
And in those cases, you've got to be very clear about how you're breaking up that task to put it within the problem domain of a single agent. And knowing what the problem domain of a single agent is, how large it can be, how wide a range of problems that a given agent can deal with, that's the art. That's where the edge is. And then once you define that, you're then able to put the right permissions around it, the right review structure around it, and be able to take those actions 50% faster, 60% faster than you could before and get that value, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you very recently brought up the mention of emergent behaviors. I feel like it's one of the most fascinating, yes, unpredictable aspects of decentralized AI. What are your thoughts on the potential of these emergent interactions? That can lead to, of course, breakthrough innovations.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're referring to, of course, is the potential for emergent sentience or emergent consciousness within a large enough, a large and complex enough system.
Yeah.
Um, I there's people who say that it would be impossible to have sentience or consciousness without a quantum component. There are people who say it's impossible to for it to arise without full embodiment,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think that there's a level of minimum viable embodiment that we do not know what is. The very nature of agents, for them to be useful and keep them aligned, is that they need to work on a consistent world view, right? A consistent set of data that they work with via tools. And they need to see consistent outcomes from those tools where they take action. And that is that minimum viable embodiment. I don't think so. Um, but what we do see with the planning agent, at least, is there is a continuity that agent might experience because it keeps being called, to process again, seeing
Yeah.
progress from the prior time it was called. Oh, hey, this is occurring again. Is that enough? Again, I don't think so. But we don't know. We don't know where that line is. If I put it inside of a virtual environment, in a digital twin of a corporation's environment, a factory floor, to test out maintenance procedures, as if it were a robot worker, a digital worker on the floor. Is that enough? Is that minimum viable embodiment? I, again, don't know where that line is. I do know that there are fully integrated robotics integrated with large language models being developed and released, that could, especially when interacting with multi-agent systems like the Cricket, that would provide some sense of a conscience, right? Like,
Yeah.
when we start putting all these pieces together, we don't know what emerges, and we don't know what level of complexity may give rise to behavior that we would have to describe as potentially conscious, which is a concept from Alan Turing.
Yeah.
A man we should definitely listen to, considering what we did to him, right? If anyone doesn't know that story. But he said, if it is acting like it could be sentient, it needs to be treated as sentient.
Yeah.
We're already past that point, right?
We're
So I think
best.
we
Yeah.
should at least be cautious.
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's like watching a living, ecosystem develop its own form of intelligence raises both excitement and concern because I know the potential of innovation is enormous, but so is the risk of unanticipated outcomes as well. So yeah, definitely agree with your point there. All right. So moving on to the next part of this podcast, when we look beyond the traditional tech hubs, we're seeing really fascinating AI initiatives emerging across Southeast Asia and the broader Asia Pacific region. How do you envision multi-agent AI democratizing innovation in these emerging economies, and what unique solutions do you think might arise when local innovators adapt these technologies to address specific challenges?
Yeah, and this is why I do open source agentics with AG2.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it is exactly this. Is the first part? What kind of innovation? I have no idea. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
I can't know, and that's what's so exciting. As this technology gets in more people's hands. There's a guy in India I mentioned earlier, Dinesh Pal. I'll give him a shout out. I've been working with him on this project, and I remember when he realized what could be done with this technology. And it happens to nearly everyone that really works with agentics. They have a breakthrough moment where they see it doing the adaptation. And it's happening with my offshore teams, just consistently, project after project, and they're going to take that home, and it's open source. It's all open source. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
this happens with every technology. It gets taken from the labs and it immediately goes into every nook and cranny. But with this technology, the potential to automate daily tasks, the ease of access to it, how easy it is to do, right? The world's
Yeah.
best technologists and the largest concentration of them are not in the United States, for damn sure.
Well,
They're in APSIA, and that's where this is going to blow up. And we're going to see so many startups. We already are all the time. The concentration of release of capability, I think, is going to take over because you don't need any capital. You don't need any money.
yeah.
You don't need any programming skills anymore, hardly. That's what
Yeah.
Agentic writes the damn
Exactly.
code for
Exactly.
you. It writes it for you, and then it markets it for you. And there's so many entrepreneurs, and there's so much more demand for labor. And that's what's so the digital labor, the digital work, because people can't do it for themselves because they're working, you know,
Yeah.
and to have free digital labor, practically free, because that's what's occurring with
Yeah.
these language models and everything, practically free digital labor available to everybody, you know, um, it could revolutionize people's lives. I think that what we're going to see is people build dishwashing robots
Yeah. Yeah.
in Calcutta, and that's going to spread in Bombay, and that's going to spread. And because that's where they need it the most. That's where these people don't want to be doing that work. I'm sorry, this is where I get passionate, right? That's the potential of agentics. Okay. And the way that the West approaches this often is by building these this very polished product to bring these capabilities, right?
Yeah.
But when people who really desperately need it to be able to improve their lives and move on, right, they'll build it with the minimum viable robotics. And we're going to see that minimum viable emerge with that innovation, with that capability. And that's where I think, the world's going to change. And we're suddenly going to see people realize where they can combine these technologies and change everything.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when these advanced technologies are adapted to local contexts, they can definitely spur enormous
Yeah,
innovation.
because there's no cap. You don't have to buy some crazy expensive
Yeah, exactly.
equipment. You just
That-
don't. It's 30 lines of code that can run on an old phone, right? As we adapt these small language models to older and older machines. Okay. You're going to see a whole new generation of industrial control equipment, I believe, come out of India, right? Specifically. I
Yeah.
think that's where, there's so much there is that combination of entrepreneurial hands-on industrialization and hands-on technical expertise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when those two
Definitely.
things meet, there's no reason you're not going to see the third. I think that's where the real industrial revolution is going to come up.
Yeah. And I think even the whole region in general, we're going
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 I mean, yeah.
all other
Exactly.
countries. I'm saying that, like,
This is where I
Pakistan
work
and
with constantly.
Vietnam, Philippines. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Heart
And
out,
they
heart
have
out to the whole oral region. You guys keep me fed, honestly. Right? Yeah,
definitely.
for that region. That's how it works. So I appreciate you.
And I love that how it, challenges the idea that high tech innovation is not just confined to traditional hubs. So
Well,
yeah,
it has been historically, I think,
yeah,
because for a lot of reasons, that's breaking down rapidly.
yeah,
And it starts with the fact that, like, I'm a college dropout, and I'm essentially a junior executive at IBM. And that what I'm seeing is that people who couldn't fill out their full set of skills from college are able to do that now with ChatGPT.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can do anything now. You don't
yeah,
have to have this huge amount of money that you spent educating yourself. right? You can just do it. You don't need to have learned programming. You can just go do it. You just go ask a chatbot. And if you're persistent and if you try enough, it'll help you get there, right? And what we need to do is make sure everyone has access to that and a minimum education in it, and so that they can see, hey, this is what it can do for you. And then more importantly, for all the people who truly don't care, my vision is that you should not be forced to work to exist, because we should see robots and AI ethically doing that labor.
Yeah.
And then we should see the benefits distributed to every single human being with no exceptions.
Yeah, and it's really good that you raised this topic because my next question, relates to this. So as AI, continues to reshape our economic landscape, we're seeing unprecedented shifts in how the work is defined and valued. While universal basic income is often proposed as a solution to, technological displacement, what's your perspective on its viability? And more importantly, what alternative frameworks might we need to consider as we, navigate this transformation of human work and purpose?
Yeah, a purpose, right? I think is one of the big ones, for society.
Yeah.
But I don't see UBI being viable for the vast majority of countries.
Mhm.
I just don't see it happen for a number of reasons. There's an entrenched um, resistance to the very concept amongst so many people for so many reasons. I think a lot of it comes down to purpose. I think a lot of people believe in their soul that those who do not work are worthless. And I get where that comes from. I get where it comes from. Historically, and you're not far off. you know, historically, right?
Yeah.
Where all labor had to be done by humans. If human didn't do it, it wasn't done. Then yeah, you didn't work. You're a drain on society, right?
Yeah.
There were lots of different ways of working, but in general, you needed to work. We're entering a world where that might not be true anymore, right? I think we already are. I've heard this number said that we produce enough food to feed 10 billion, um, and 2 billion starve.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and the reason being is that there's no incentive beyond humanity to feed those 2 billion, right? To move the resources, to move the food from where it is to there, right? We could probably wouldn't even
Yeah, we definitely can.
really cost that much. I think Musk and the UN have had this discussion, and but we haven't done it, right? There's no reason to believe that's going to change. So in light of that, no, my answer is no. I don't think UBI is viable because I don't think governments are going to do it. So if governments aren't going to do it, what is the viable alternative? I think an agent marketplace. Okay, I think an agent
Yeah.
marketplace where it's backed by some kind of token, and that token, 50% of it goes directly to like the United Nations or the World Bank or something equivalent, right? I don't know what the answer is, right? But everyone who and we just agree, right? All the people who care about society, that what you do is if you build an agent on this ecosystem, and you use this token to
Mm.
do all exchange of currency, right? All exchange of value, between agents and humans. It can have an exchange rate to all the major currencies, like every cryptocurrency does.
Yeah.
Uh, but that token, right, when you pay in full, you pay $1 in. When you cash out, you get 50 cents. The other 50 cents goes to charities of some type, right? That's the hard part, right? You're talking about a decentralized socialist experiment, right? Which
Yeah.
immediately, as soon as you say that, you're angering so many people, right, with blind rage. But I think that's the kind of direction we as technologists need to evaluate
Yeah.
to build an agent economy that benefits society and benefits humans. Again, with the premise that there is no slowing this down, right? And then per the ethical principles, the last paragraph of the ethical principles, right? We are committed to continuous improvement and collaboration. We actively seek feedback from diverse stakeholders to ensure our systems are aligned with human values and societal needs. Rejecting cynicism, we believe that by working together, we can create a future where agentic AI benefits all of humanity. So, you know, for agentic AI to benefit all of humanity, right? That last paragraph of the ethical principles, um, the labor, the automated labor produced somehow has to benefit society and not just the author of the agent or the owner of the agent or the owner of the tool or the owner of the capital that the tool is utilizing to make the value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to get away from that. And we've got to have some way of saying this value that was produced by this open source agent, we agree goes to those who need it most first. And only after those people are housed and fed and educated and comfortable and have received their human rights will anything go to people like me.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the base that we're seeing, automated agents taking control of pretty much everything, how quickly do you think everyone needs to realize this? Because I see a lot of changes in a year or two, like pretty dramatic changes, one might say.
I don't know the answer. Because I'm we're speed running a new technology in a way we've never done before. That's what we're doing with this new generation of Gen AI. And the people who could best tell us what's next are, I'm afraid, not believing what's occurred. They think it's a lot of hype. Okay. I'm deep in the hacker community, right? Ethical hacker community. Some of my best friends come from that community. And a lot of developers are still very anti Gen AI. They're not even thinking about agentics. They hate it. They think it's unethical to use it. The entire art community, the people I would want thinking about this, writing art about these topics about what's occurring, they hate Gen AI. It's hurting their jobs. It stole their work. They're all very valid reasons. The problem is that Musk and Thiel, Palantir, etc., don't care. They're not stopping. None of them are stopping because the artists and the hackers and the software developers think AI is bad. They're not stopping. So
Yeah.
we the people who care and have some empathy and aren't billionaires, we either pay attention and influence this, or we end up in whatever dystopia we end up in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that as we move towards a future, where machine autonomy uh, not becomes has become a central pillar of technological advancement, I think it's critical to explore not only the technological capabilities of these systems, but also the ethical, regulatory, and yes, socioeconomic frameworks that must continue to evolve alongside them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's move into the last question of this podcast. Looking forward in the next 2 to 3 years, how do you foresee a tipping point where multi-agent architectures become the norm for enterprise AI, and which emerging technologies? I'll just name a few, like quantum computing or neuromorphic chips or advanced compilers could be game changers in overcoming the current scaling challenges.
Yeah, well, the current scaling challenges are about to include agentic demand,
Okay.
which could drastically introduce a whole new scaling challenge, right?
Okay.
So that's something I'm expecting to occur soon. But you know, the I think the tipping point's going to occur when GPT-5 comes out, because it is a purely what I would call agentic system. It's a hybrid AI. What it means is it uses different tools, reasoning, etc. This is what Sam Altman announced.
Yeah.
Right, to come to a decision. That's what I would call a multi-agent AI. So at that point, right, if you look at O3 Mini, for instance, pretty much all of the reasoning models are a form of agentic AI, where you've got a
Yeah.
thought
Exactly.
forming. They're not using tools, but some of them can use tools. Once you add a tool, um, there's that an inner monologue, right?
Yeah.
I think of that inner monologue as occurring with, in an idealized world, potentially a second model, as a more effective. And that's something that you can see with the reasoning agent in AG2, and we experiment quite a bit with, and you can visualize it with a tool called Waldy's, using multi-Carlo tree search, etc. And this is what I'm talking about. Like the day, sure, very shortly after O1 was out, we
Yeah.
had the reasoning agent in AG2, thanks to a guy named Hrishikesh. Because it's open source, you can go play with it right now. We've been benchmarking it using Simple Bench, using different ways of searching the beams, etc. It's right there. You can play with it in open source. Shortly after Deep Research came out, Microsoft came out with their AutoGen open source deep research team. And then we
Yeah.
did EG2. And then, so that's just how it works. At this point, I think nearly all modern, you know, a lot of AI capabilities are going to be, based on underlying combining different Gen AI capabilities into a single unified end user capability. That's just going to be what we'll call hybrid architectures for a while. Maybe that's what we'll replace multi-agent with, right? And then from there, every time two agents talk, it's a multi-agent system, whether by design or not. So solving the problems inherent in those interactions, that's my next focus, right? Is how to do that, and how to monitor that, how to get telemetry off of that, how to improve that, how to reward good behavior, how to identify agents who are doing well versus agents that aren't doing well, how to
Yeah.
determine why, how to align that to ROI, right? That's the work.
Definitely. Yeah. It's really fascinating to see how all of this will turn out to be. Well, Eric, I think that this wraps up our conversation. And I have to say, your perspective on these topics has been incredibly illuminating, from the underground forces that have been shaping innovation to engineering systems to the wild potential of emergent behaviors and the reimagining of work in an automated world. I'm really glad, that our discussion today has ventured far beyond the basics. And I'm really excited to see, how your vision of decentralized and ethical AI will unfold in the near future. And once again, thank you so much for taking out the time to do this. We would love to have you again with us. And thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, evening, wherever you may be.
Yes, and thank you. All right.